Hello, welcome to Z Marie Design. Let's upcycle a pair of jeans into a unique purse. Let's get started. So my pair of jeans, I cut off the top portion of the jeans first, just below the crotch. So next I'm going to seam rip my waistband and my belt loops, and I'll set that aside for another project later. I then turn my jeans so that my side seams are my front center and my back center. And I'm going to cut a straight edge on both of my side seams. So next I'm going to set aside my waistband and my belt loops for another project. And then I'm going to cut a straight edge at the top and at the bottom. I'm also going to cut out a 2 by 2 inch square from my bottom corners. I'm going to use this part as my pattern. I'm going to cut out 2 of my lining fabrics. So next I'm going to cut out my pocket patterns, and my pockets are cut 6.5 by 7.5 inches, and I'm going to cut 2 from my lining fabric, and with right sides facing, I'm going to leave a 4-inch opening and sew all the way around. Next I'm going to cut off the corners, and I'm going to trim that seam allowance, making it easier for turning. So next I'll turn both of my pockets right side out using my turning tool. I'm just using an upcycled chopstick to poke out those corners. And I'll press it and I'll top stitch at the top. I'll fold it in half to find the center, and that'll be my placement and just a bit on my lining. So on my lining fabric, I will fold it in half, and I'm going to measure down 1.5 inches center. That's where I will make my mark for my magnetic snap, and 3 inches down for my pocket. So my magnetic snap comes in 4 pieces, and you also need 2 pieces for interfacing. You use 1 piece of your washer, has 2 slits, and that's what you'll use to make your markings so that your magnetic snap can be inserted. Make 2 snips on those markings, and entering from the front part of your fabric, you're going to press in those prongs, put on that interfacing. I'm using upcycled batting. Put on your washer and press it down. Both of your magnetic snaps are inserted. Now I'm just finding my mark there for my pocket, and I'm centering my pocket, and I'm going to pin it in place, and I'm going to sew down all 3 sides, catching that opening closed. I'll do that on both of my linings. I also cut my 2 by 2 inch square from my bottom corners, and with right sides facing, I'm going to match up my raw edges on my side seams and my raw edges on my bottom seam. And I'm going to sew on my side seams and on my bottom seam. On my bottom seam, I'll leave a 4 to 5 inch opening for turning my bag right side out later. Next, I'll press my seams open on all 3 sides. You see I have my 4 to 5 inch opening there for turning later. And I'll set that aside in just a bit here after I box my corners. So I'll bring my side seam down to meet my bottom seam, matching those seams up, pinning that in place, and again taking a 1/2 inch seam allowance. After my corners are boxed, I'll trim that to a 1/4 inch seam allowance, turning it right side out, and you'll see my boxed corners. So next on my denim panels, I'm going to put some embellishments. I'm gathering my ribbons, my rickrack, some lace, and some fringe, and I'm just using my color coordination from my lining fabric. And I'm going to put my fringe on. I'm going to mark a 1/2 inch up and a 1/2 inch in from the bottom and from those corners, and I will stitch that in place. After I stitched it in place, I realized that I hadn't put my ribbon on. So I ended up having to seam rip my fringe off and take it off and then put my ribbon and my laces on. You'll see that in a minute. So I took my fringe off and then I put it on all of my lace. I'm also using some upcycled pieces of broken jewelry. I put on some tassels and some pom-poms. Cutting my 2 by 2 inch square, my corner to box my bag in just a bit. Just like we did on the lining. And then I'm going to go ahead and add my fringe. And I'm sewing my fringe so that it's upside down, because when I turn the bag right side out, I want the fringe to hang down the bottom of the bag. So now that my fringe is sewn on and all of my embellishments are the way that I like them, be creative when you put your embellishments on. Just whatever you like. I added quite a bit of embellishments. Next, I'm going to upcycle my waistband. I just seam ripped my waistband open. It measures about 4 inches wide. I'm going to cut it 24 inches long. But before I do that, I'm going to cut it in half to make 2 of my waistbands, and there I'm trimming it to 24 inches long. And then using my lining fabric, I will also cut a piece that's about 2 inches by 24 inches. And then I'm going to do that, place those right sides facing, sew up one side, and then sew up the other side, pressing those seams open. After I sewed up both sides, creating a tube, I'm going to use a safety pin and just turn those right sides out. Now after it's all turned right side out, and it took me a bit to turn this right side out, I press it and I'm going to top stitch on both sides. So now it's time to attach my handles to my denim parts of my bag, measuring 4 inches in from each of the side seams. I made a mark and I'm going to put my handles on, making sure that my handles are not twisted. I'm going to top stitch about a 1/4 inch on both of those handles, just using a basting stitch for now. Now that my handles are attached, I'm going to put my denim panels together, right sides facing. Matching up my side seam and my bottom seam, I sew a 1/2 inch seam allowance and I press my seams open. Next, on to boxing my corners. I'm going to bring my side seam up to meet my bottom seam, pinning it in place, and again also a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Making sure to watch that pocket that's on the one side. I didn't want to catch that part in that seam. And then I'm going to trim that to a 1/4 inch, turning my bag right side out, pushing out those boxed corners. You can see now where my fringe is. I haven't taken my seam off my fringe yet. I'm going to do that now. There's just a basting stitch there on the fringe while you're sewing it. And so I'm taking that off. And just using my seam ripper to do that. And my bag, denim part of my bag is all ready. So now with my lining, I'm going to turn my lining wrong sides out, and I'll leave my denim part of my bag right side out. And I'm going to put my denim part of my bag inside my lining so that right sides are facing. I match up my side seams first, pin that in place, making sure that all my embellishments, pom-poms, all of my handles are on the inside. Match up my center seams, and then I continue to match up those raw edges. Now everything is all pinned in place. I'll take it to my sewing machine and I'll sew a 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way around. Now that my top of my bag is all sewn together, through that opening that we have in the lining, I'll pull the bag right side out. And we're almost done with our denim upcycle. And just take your time on this, turning it right side out, because we have a lot of embellishments on here. I didn't want any parts of the embellishments to fall off. So I push those box corners out, and then I pin my seam allowance that's left from my opening. I pin that closed, and I just take it to the sewing machine and I just top stitch that opening closed. Then I put my lining inside my denim, take it to the ironing board and give it a really good press at the top. And then I will top stitch all the way around. And I usually increase my top stitch to about 3.5, and our denim upcycle is all done. And you can use the pockets on the inside, and you can also use the pockets on the outside. So I hope you like this project. I hope you'll give it a try. Thanks for watching.